When preparing an essentially stock vehicle for the hobby of overlanding, even a stock vehicle equipped for off-road driving like a Jeep Wrangler Rubicon, people will typically say start with tires and maybe a lift. However, because of the way we're set up, the primary things I wanted to start with were some type of roof rack storage capability. In this case, it wouldn't be much because what I was going to mount was going to attach to the gutters of the hardtop, and you don't want to put a lot of weight onto those. Then also a winch, because I spend a lot of time in the forest. I've gotten stuck on stumps from time to time, and I didn't want to have my wife's 4xe Sparky out in the forest without any kind of self-recovery setup, and I certainly didn't want to rely on a hand winch. What I later realized, and I'll cover in a later video, even with the Rubicon package, if you're going to drive in any kind of woods, you really need to add additional undercarriage protection beyond what is offered by the Rubicon package. And that's what this is all about, getting this truck to where Kathy, even though she can't join me on this trip, wanted me to take Sparky on this trip to our acreage. So I'll pull our M416 trailer all loaded with our overlanding gear. I'll have the chainsaws and the extra gear and the Thule on top. And it'll be the first time we do the pack out exclusively with Sparky, so we'll see if everything fits. And then, we'll see how that trip goes. This is Wednesday, Friday morning I'll be leaving. And yes, I'm saying all that because I'm tired and I wanted to take a break. What I'm about to do this evening is install a winch on Sparky, my wife's Wrangler 4xe. I'm going to unbox the very unremarkable winch. Now, I'm using a worn winch plate. I reviewed probably 3 or 4 videos, confirmed that on a Wrangler 4xe JL, the install is the same. Now, if you do have a Rubicon, there's a clearance provision for the sway bar disconnect that I did verify that this winch plate will have. Other than that, the winch draws its power from the car battery the same way it would on a non-plug-in hybrid JL. If you have the Echo Diesel, this or that, if you look at the videos, what varies is the placement of different items under the hood and how you're going to route the power cabling. But in terms of, is it different because it's a plug-in hybrid? No. From everything I've read and studied so far, the drivetrain electrical system is separate from the battery that starts the car. So in that sense, as we add accessories, it's just like any other JL. Now the other thing that's worth mentioning, so this is my H3 Hummer here beside Sparky. It has a receiver mounted winch. I decided not to go that route with the Wrangler, at least for now. So I just bought a conventional winch plate, give it a conventional winch bumper. I'm kind of rushing the install because tomorrow's Thursday, first thing Friday morning, I want to head out to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to our land up there. Kathy and I agreed I would take Sparky this time, and I'd rather have the winch on Sparky for the trip. I doubt I'll need a winch recovery, but I'd rather not rely on a hand winch. And none of the cabling's run, so I can't use the receiver winch in the back on Sparky, nor do I have a front receiver mount. So I'm going to try and get the winch installed. The other thing worth mentioning, there's a lot of argument about how much do you spend on a winch because you don't want it to fail when you're in when you're in a pinch. Many years ago, decades ago, when I was more involved with the off-road community, it was all mile marker, Warn, Super Winch, Ramsey. Now, if you do your research, you'll find most of the less expensive, let's say less than $2,000, less than $15,000 winches are pretty much all sourced from China, and at best internationally sourced. So I did get an inexpensive, like $350 X-Bull winch for the H3 that I keep in the receiver. I've used it to pull trees. I've used it just to make sure it works. I think I've used it for recovery. I've pulled myself up over a hill with it and had no issues. Now, if I were out like hardcore winching every day, I'd go for an absolute top end, probably hydraulic winch from mile marker. But for what I do and as often as I do it, I just don't see any point in tying up that kind of money. So again, this is an X-Bull. This is like your Harbor Freight Badlands. People will make fun of it. I warned my wife, the guys in the Jeep Club will tell you you're not cool if you try to join because you'll have an X-Bull winch. But to my knowledge, this is virtually identical to the Warn VR series, which are also Chinese sourced. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that I could buy Warn stickers and it would be indistinguishable from some of the Warn VR series winches. So, all that said, this is the X-Bull 13,500 pound winch purchased on Amazon. The Warn winch plate, I think I also got on Amazon. Don't remember for sure. Had some drama getting this here, but to the great credit of X-Bull, they were very responsive. The first winch was lost or stolen, never properly got tracked or shipped, and so they shipped me a replacement from a different warehouse, which was pretty awesome. All right, I'll just hold up the winch here just to get some idea. And this is a synthetic line, which I highly encourage for safety reasons and for weight and performance reasons. So that weighs, you know, probably a good 60 or so pounds. So it's, you know, you're going to feel that. That's the challenge with the receiver mount of like a 12,000 pound, 13,000 pound winch. Again, synthetic line, but that winch on the plate is at least 80 pounds. So I can tell you that's a workout for me. So you can imagine with the receiver mount in there, I don't want to be putting it on while I'm in the mud. That would be bad. So anyway, without much further ado, this is not, I'm looking at it, identical to the X-Bull I got before, but darn close. And I suspect that if you put a little Warn sticker right there instead of X-Bull, I'm thinking that is probably the same factory in China that produces the Warn VR series. Okay, so I've looked at multiple different YouTube videos that lay this out very well. Hopefully when I edit and post this, I'll remember to put links in the description. So the sequence of steps is pretty straightforward. You remove this decorative plate, disconnect the power. It's got a factory steel bumper. Basically remove the bumper, mount the winch base plate with its spacers to allow the bumper to return to proper position. Remove this little fascia plate. I'll have to figure out what's going to happen with the license plate after that. Synthetic winch doesn't need a roller fair lead. It'll just have the simple metal plate that'll go there. Pretty straightforward. Hopefully won't take me too long. So if memory serves, that was just a cheap deal on Amazon. I get an assortment of body pins, and with them came various forks that you can use to remove them. You can also use a screwdriver here, which I might resort to before it's all said and done. There we go. There we go. And that's that. So with those two removed, you can see where the wiring is for the lights. And it just goes across the bumper, and this is where it comes in from the truck. I remember from what I read, there's not 20 different fancy ways to remove that. Pretty straightforward. Let's see if we can. There we go. Just needed to push in and it pops right out. I never want to muscle those because if you're using a lot of oomph, you probably just missed the direction of the mechanism. All right. Now, if I'm not mistaken, my next trick, I just take the 8 bolts out of there. Check first to see, maybe I need to disconnect the skid plate first, which is a few bolts down there. Yeah, double check the sequence, and it is the skid plate bolts. Okay, and if your guess was 13 millimeters, you would get the prize. One handy little bit of gear I'll run and grab is a magnetic bowl for the bolts. Finally spent a few pennies on funny little tools like that the other day. It's one of the beauties of Amazon. You think many times as I've spilled the bolts I was working with, putting them in a magnetic bowl is probably worth it. There's one nice thing about a Rubicon is he's not skimped. There's no skimpy undercarriage protection. That is stout. Like that, just like the Hummer HV, there's the Alpha. It's got some very heavy undercarriage protection on it, which is obviously not great for efficiencies, but you can get a little aggressive with the skinny pedal. It's nice to know something other than your oil pan or the equivalent is going to hit first. So, all right, skid plate is off. Show you the metric measurement, not the torques or star if you prefer. So those are just held on by little metal clips that bite the threads. All right, Boss's DOS. There's the little plate for the top there. Starting to look like something. Again, in the sequence, fairly soon here, I'll have the bumper off, then the winch plate on, then the rest of the stuff can go back on. That mounting plate takes some time and effort. Well, that's awkward. One thing always to do in a project like this is make sure you line up the tools ahead of time. It's 8 o'clock. I can still get to the car parts store. Feeling kind of stupid because I don't have a deep 18 millimeter socket. And yes, I did the bad thing. I tried with a 3/4, but no. It's almost a brand new truck, so I thought I got first two loosened out. Oh, good, I can get away with this. Then pop, okay, I'm not going to do that twice. I'm not going to round the nut. I tried it one more time, like, all right, that's stupid. Go get an 18 millimeter deep socket and finish what is actually not a very long job. All right, life is always better when you have the right tool for the job. Well, I was and voila. Extension work. Alrighty. We'll just set that bad boy right there. And we'll see about just setting this on it. That's much better. So this is very neighborly. So hard. And again, factory steel bumper here. Alrighty. 8 bolts and the bumper's off. Alright, so at this point, now that the bumper's off, I want to look more closely at how the worn plate is going to mount. Because this is where it will secure to those little frame mounts. Those little zip ties I was talking about, along with the mounting hardware. And these jobbers. Spacers are floating around here somewhere. And then of course the plate itself. So I'll take that all out here. Now, there's actually a lot to these for what it's worth. And I like the worn mostly because of the way it mounts. It has multiple secure mounting points. I believe this is stamped steel, though I do see a weld in there and there. Although that main part is all stamped steel. So again, if you're going to pull 12, 13,000 pounds, it's one thing like with my receiver mount winch on the H3 over there. The rear 2-inch receiver hitch cannot, I mean, if I went full load on the winch, it would probably bend or tear off the trailer hitch. The front receiver is custom mounted, that's secure. So again, this thing doesn't just hold up a winch, it has to withstand an enormous amount of pulling power without warping and without tearing free from the chassis of the Jeep. Alright, so that's the main winch plate there. That's why they give you those big zip ties, so you don't have to try to hold that up while you're threading bolts. And these are the little spacers. So these 2 bolts will be supporting part of the winch plate. So when you attach the bumper, it needs spacers on the other side. That'll become obvious here shortly, I hope. Okay, yep, that's what I thought. Next thing it wants me to do is remove the bolts where the skid plate mounting bracket is. 2 on each side, retain the bolts. Yep, and that's how these jobbers go. That's what I thought. The winch plate bracket mounts there. Okay, so we'll do that next. I believe those are 16 millimeter. This will be a very different experience. If this truck were not almost like sorry, Jeepers never call their Jeeps trucks, do they? If this Jeep were not almost brand new. And no, I'm not a Jeep guy. I had a TJ, 2006 TJ, loved that little truck. But I traded that in for that 2008 Hummer. A little 2-door soft top, nice little Jeep 4-cylinder, which is part of why I had to trade it. It was just so tragically underpowered. But I kind of knew that when I bought it. I thought my teenage son would be driving it, so I didn't want it to have too much Clemson on the right side, so I believe it's going to go this way. Of course, I didn't need that picture right at the ready. There we go, that's that coming off. Okay, so they go backwards. So this one goes on that side. I guess I guessed correctly when I plopped it down. So afraid I was going to do that. I did not put the bracket back in underneath. That's why I wanted to look at that picture. Yep. So you just put that bracket right back underneath and you put this on over it. Yeah, using hardware removed in the previous one. I better take one more look at that and just make. Alrighty then. This jobber will be the same way. The JL has this deal with the Rubicon version with that disconnect. And I don't know if anyone still makes a winch plate where you need both versions, you know, you need, or I should say where they sell both versions, you know, where you could theoretically accidentally buy the non-Rubicon version. Alrighty. So this is where it encourages you to do the little zip ties so that you can hold the support plate into place while you put the winch in it before you try to bolt the bumper back on. So that's going to be quite a little undertaking. I'm going to go through that in some detail before I pop it on. Let's see how that back plate catches the wings. These holes are going to line up with the bumper bolts, but because the bolts stay with the bumper and they're not studs sticking out, there's no way to hang this and put your winch on it and everything without hanging this first. So kind of have to get that over through the, that was awesome, back up over through the frame. I'm going to voice over a bit here. It was only pretty much when the project was over that I finally figured out how to route the zip ties properly. So I'd encourage you to just take a few minutes and realize where you have to put the zip ties to hold up the winch plate without them being in your way later when you're trying to tighten things up. But honestly, the zip ties were not that critical to the success of the project. Keep in mind that, you know, probably the bottom hole would have been less in the way, but not overly concerned about it. Oh, boy, my back is getting stiff. Working one-handed is not always fun. All right. And how did they do it? And the carriage bolt head. Oh, that's interesting. Check that again. Yeah, the plate. Well, they really don't show that well. I'm glad I'm looking at this carefully because the carriage bolt only makes sense. Well, no, those brackets have square holes as well, but the way they're showing it, the back of the winch plate is behind that little dropper. And they really don't show that at all. It's such a lousy photograph. I'm just trying to look right there. And that certainly does indicate that this plate is behind those hangers. No, that is not possible. All right. So I'm going to mess with this a bit just to make sure. But the picture is so blurred that it looks as if it wanted this back lip behind those tabs, which honestly makes more sense. I really should have just gotten that. I've seen videos where people mount this plate and it's obviously a lot better than those black and white instructions. I should have rewatched them. I thought, how hard can it be? It's like 5 bolts. And now I realize there are just enough things to be confusing. Inch on there, it's going to sag. All right. That's how the winch plate is supposed to go on there initially. I put the winch in, accessories, tidy up the bumper, and then final assembly. Well, it feels a little less dumb. I went and checked Brad from TrailRecon, and I saw he did the same thing, and then he kind of edits it, and you go back and notice the carriage bolts are in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put the nuts on those. Now, I did just look at the winch, and the only instructions for the winch are going to be online, which is okay because I've installed them before. This is the key. There's no information in there at all, but these little square nuts slide into the winch so that your mounting bolts can come up through the winch plate and find these threads. If you don't know that, you're going to stare at this hardware and think, what on earth? But yeah, I've got to mess around a bit later and see if X-Bull maybe put good instructions on the web somewhere, because what's in the box really has no proper install instructions at all. Carriage bolts that I was messing with a short time ago. And actually, I remember the other reason I was trying to look at his video was to make sure he did the same thing I'm doing, which he did. There's no way the winch plate fits behind that plate up against the sway bar disconnect. Now again, in the pictures that came from Warren, that is not clear, but there's only one way this could possibly go on. It's just a little more confusing on the driver's side, because on the driver's side, I could see where you could think, oh, now I can put this behind the little doohickey, and it would seem stronger, right? Because this is just the tensile strength of the bolt that's going to keep this from snapping. Whereas if they went on the other side of that steel, it would have to rip the steel out of the bumper, which, to my simple way of thinking, would have been much stronger. I'm pretty sure these are 15s, not 16s. Oh, 15. Well, it's a 15, we just can't do I hear a 15. Got my gloves back on as many times as I wrap my knuckles. I just want to get started. Really torque that, you know, the scientific way, like 5 ohms or 10 ohms instead of 2 or 3. And that's a unit of measure for torque, the oomph. Yeah, it was loose. It scared me. Those ways a little DIY sometimes can really get you in trouble. All right, now like I say, the winch itself won't be interesting. I'll go ahead and film that here in a second, but I'll put those little square nuts in. I'll set that in. I'll secure it to the winch plate. Okay, so I had to decide there, poking around, which would be easier. Work on the wiring now and then plop it in wired, or plop it in and then wire it. After looking at a couple of videos of people with the same winch or nearly identical winch, I'm going to set it in place, slide these guys in place, get it on the winch plate, put the anchor bolts in, at least finger tight, and then I'll mount the control box and all that. Now you can see it should be pretty easy to get at everything once it's dropped in. There's not a lot of clearance issues there. And I'm going to slide the zip tie is just under the motor, so it wants to push it a little bit that way. I think I can make it work without too much colorful language. Turn each one of these guys. And we'll see how far I get with this. Keep playing with this. And I should be able to get those 4 lined up, and then I can just not tighten it down until I get that zip tie out of here. Yep. Got right in there. All right. Well, that could have been a whole lot worse, and I can get at those wiring posts there. So it's going to be all right. Whew, almost there. All right, so that was a 16 millimeter socket on the winch mounting bolts, using again a precise torque spec of, since I'm not exactly a flange gasket or something, it was about 5 or 10 oomph before I was satisfied those were clamped down. I still have not tightened the bottom winch to the carriage bolts fully, but they're pretty snug. Actually pretty darn snug now I think about it. So now I'll mess around rounding up the parts and get ready to finish assembling the winch. Then the bumper goes back on. Alright, just a little more fiddling around. Secured the corded remote to that bundle. But that's going to be interesting. That'll work, but that's tight to get it between the grill and the mount and get these wires where they belong. I encourage you, quadruple check wiring. First time I did a winch, it was an X-Pull winch. There were minimal instructions. And I couldn't figure it out, and then I'm pretty sure that I basically like dead shorted through the motor windings. Probably took 5 years off the life of the winch. And it was because I misrouted the ground. Talked to a buddy at work who's a big Jeep Club guy, and he laughed and he said, I know exactly what you did. He said, I've done it before as well. And he said, you're right. Triple check your wiring diagram before you go, because that is a very easy mistake to make, is to end up, because you've got your red hot, you got the yellow cable, the black cable, and you got your safety ground. And you just gotta be very careful which ground goes to the ground post back here. Otherwise, not doing yourself any favors. All right, simple enough. I just got to pop those screws in, mount that box, get that wiring proper. I'll probably zoom in on that when I'm ready, and then reassemble. All right, now that I fooled around with it, I'm definitely glad that I put the winch in before I tried to put this box on, because just looking around, I can see that would have been a whole lot of no fun trying to get those 4 bolt holes mounted with a little bit of tension on these cables that go to the control box. So, kind of like a blind squirrel. A little bit closer. Okay, that took some effort. You can see it there in the camera, but I had to go on Expol's website, and this is not for one particular winch, but you can tell the control box, this is that motor. The posts are in the back. One thing that's nice is that little post that's usually under the motor, and this one is not. You can clearly tell that one apart. That's the one that's going to come from the negative terminal of the battery, and then into the control box from the positive. What was not easy to see was whether that was red, yellow, black, black. Yep, it's these 3 posts that were really hard to see. So I did eventually find it online, and that's what I'm going to be doing back behind the motor here. Okay, so I'm just mounting the cables on those posts with a 13mm wrench. And occurs to me now is the time to grab the ground cable that runs back to the battery, and just make sure that I go ahead and thread these up. I'll just secure them inside the Jeep before I don't want to mess around with that stuff. I've never noticed before. Let me just get Sparky's hood up in here with that winch up there. Okay, so seeing a million guys do it, I'll basically be able to chase it up through here. So what I'm going to do with the ground is basically kind of roll it up here by the battery, send the main down there. Got a nice mounting post for the accessory. So at least Jeep gives you a lot of places to secure that. My H3 did as well, that was nice. So again, the heavy cable will go from the battery down through, and it will mount on this post. Usually it's in the bottom of the motor, but in this winch, conveniently, they put it back here. These are all 13mm. Then red, yellow, black on the posts. This red wire is long, routes up to the battery. This black cable, battery down to that post, and that'll be power to the winch. All right, so would it have been easier to make those connections before I mounted the winch on the plate? I still don't know, maybe. But in any event, that's all good. It's secured. And the other thing I always forget is the loop, the ground from the control box has to go on that same post. Now again, that ground post is usually mounted on the bottom of the motor, in which case there's no way you would put it in there and then wire it. You'd always do it the other way around. This, I just routed up the same way everybody always does, kind of on the side of the radiator. I'm just looping it here for now because I think I'm going to pass it under the air box, or obviously away from the heat of the radiator and the engine. Haven't decided exactly how. Maybe just in that little spot there between the air box and the vent. Now I'm going to crawl under the Jeep and struggle to get the red cable to match the route of the black heavy cable. Then I'll button all this up. I may or may not hook to the battery post tonight and just play with it, but at a minimum I want to get everything put back together. So I'll be ready for my trip up to the UP. All right, hopefully everything's in frame. I'm just going to line the floor, try and take this cable. Now, if this has been out dirty, I'd make sure I wear safety glasses. One of the most annoying things is when you're under a car and you keep dropping little specks in your eye. Slide down here. And right by the, well, I guess we're standing back up here in a second. Be reachable from the top of the Jeep now. Yeah, there it goes. It's got a little bit of that twisty tension to hold it in place. Alrighty then. Yeah, how about that? I can actually see it. It worked out. Most direct route. I'm going to try and set some looming over it later. Now this I know can make it. Can this bad boy find his way past the airbox, front or back, and get over there. Well, it's certainly going to be tight. We're going to make it. All right. I didn't even have to do anything crazy. I'll just zip tie or glue those together. That wasn't so bad. I was expecting a much harder time. All right. The one top tip I did just notice Brad from TrailRecon do was go ahead and test it. So it's a little anticlimactic. I already did it once, and I don't have proper metric nuts to hold that down properly, so it might spark a bit, but it's engaged. Goes out. Goes in. So connections are good. Ready for reassembly. Remote as well. I got to double check that that did come with it. All right, the GoPro battery died. So I just reviewed. So there's the spacer. And there's the couple of wiring clips that are supposed to pop out at each end. And now the instructions simply say, with assistance, pick it up, put it back into the holes. Make sure these bad boys are going to work. Probably got to cinch that guy up a little bit. And we will see what there is to see. We'll see how successful I will be sticking that bad boy on there. Put him here and here. Limits me to coming up with a plan B. Well, I'd like to lie and say this is a really sophisticated approach, but all I really did was just jostle until I finally got one or two bolts with enough threads through that I could put a nut on it and tighten it so I could hold it for me. And then I kind of jostled, and eventually outside bolt, outside bolt, outside bolt, outside bolt, pulled it enough that I could get the 4 outside bolts started. It was not fun, but it works. So that's the story of that. No resistance, it's just kind of pulling the bumper back in. All right, just about done here. Been a late night. Gonna put the fair lead on. Took forever to tighten those bolts down. Get this bad boy on. This has got the mount for the license plate, so I'll get the license plate on there. And the fair lead, so my wife can proudly acclaim to the world, oh, and of course the skid plate, that yes, she's the proud owner of a cheap Chinese winch, but actually a pretty decent quality Chinese winch from my past experience. But like I told her, you can't hang out with the cool kids in the Jeep Club because I'll only make fun of you. But that's just about how things are going to end up. We'll put those plates on with the fastening hardware, put the license plate on, get the skid plate back on. I've got to clean up where, have me pop those wire holders. They pop back into the winch plate. They don't really show you where, but you can figure it out when you're underneath. Just about done. Okay, well, life is never boring. The fasteners that came with the fair lead and the plate that goes over this were ever so slightly too small. So, nice metric bolt, good and stout, a bit too short. So I'm just going to use a standard SAE 7/16. And I'm getting tired and loopy, but this should work. Does the washer fit? Okay, so that was a kind of weird thing. You need like a really tiny washer in there. Tonight is about getting her done. All right, I'll tighten that up. And then, like I say, just a couple more bits of button up, skid plate, this and that. And one kind of tedious, fiddly little bit I'm going to have to do here is the wiring harness that used to go back here. They had us move the wire, and it's going to connect in a hole right there in that winch plate. So it's really hard to see, but there's a little hole there in the winch plate that those go into. Skid plate bolts back up, and that'll be it. All right. That's very familiar to me to be flopping around in the concrete, but I changed it all in the Hummer. I've got to take off the undercarriage protection, so crawling on the ground and not get hit in the face with a skid plate is actually a very familiar experience for me. Sorry about that, GoPro. Let's move the climb out of here anyway. Right now, I'm going to get this fastener on there. Yeah, these little guys are just a nightmare. There's almost no way to get my hand in there. Alright, well, that was quite an ordeal. It's probably about 1 a.m. and I got to work tomorrow, so that's not good, but Sparky is ready for his trip. A couple things I realized: I still don't have a circuit breaker. Got to buy another circuit breaker to put in that little circuit there. You don't want to just come straight off the battery to the winch without giving it a safety there. So I'll buy one of those, get that installed eventually. All right, I'm going to take Sparky for a little spin, make sure everything is hunky-dory. And at least now for this next trip, Sparky has a winch. Oh, and a roof rack. Well, not a fancy overlanding roof rack, but what I need so that it can, Sparky can take the Thule. Just want to do this last bit before I went to bed, just like the last bit of the winch install. And the only thing left was to hook up, because I'd forgotten when I bought it to buy a breaker. It's like on the Hummer, when I bought it, I bought a large circuit breaker there just to protect. Remember, it's 200 amp or 300 amp, but large enough that you can load up the winch motor, but still, if there's a dead short, it'll protect everything else. So the last bit I needed to do is just, I didn't have it big enough. I think it's like a 2-gauge connector there, ring connector. So I got all that squared away today, and now Sparky is finally done. Undercloak is done. Winch is done, roof rack is done.